Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us Nabil Souli, CEO of UBiqube. Nabil, it's great to have you on the show.
Nice meeting you, Swapnil. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to have you here. And since this is the first time we're talking to each other, I would love to know a bit about the company. So tell me, what do you folks do? What problem are you trying to solve?
All right. Well, UBiqube is a company that's specialized in cloud infrastructure automation. And if I want to make it short, the very problem we're trying to solve is we're trying to eradicate complexity from the entire cloud building environment and cloud usage environment. That's basically our purpose in life.
When we talk about cloud complexity, can you talk about, look, when you look at cloud, there's of course public cloud, private cloud, but then there is also cloud native. Cloud native is not a product or a place, it's a way of doing things. And that's where a lot of complexities are there, especially, if you look at Kubernetes and observability, everything is there. So when you talk about complexity, what kind of complexity are you talking about?
So that's a very good question, Swapnil. Let me clarify what I mean by complexity. I'm going to draw a demarcation line. For me, the demarcation line is anything that's not the application itself, what it was made for, anything that is the infrastructure that supports the application, that infrastructure, be it physical, be it a piece of software that's there to help the application run on a distributed set of environments. For me, that's infrastructure. And the complexity we're going after is that one. Okay. Anything application related, we will not touch.
Once again, when you talk about infrastructure layer, and that's where the actual complexity is. So if you can also talk about what kind of complexities are there. Once again, we'll talk about either we can talk about cloud, which could be a specific public cloud. It could be OpenStack private cloud. It could be multi-cloud where you are running things in the different resources, or it could be hybrid cloud where a lot of things are on-prem. So once again, going back to the point of when you talk about complexity, what kind of complexity are you talking about from the infrastructure point of view?
Well, I'm glad you presented it this way because we're actually touching all of them. Let's describe it this way. The way we look at things, we try to put ourselves in the shoes of the application developer. In the large sense of the term application developer. And at the end of the day, an application developer, once they've finished coding their application, they just want to deploy it somewhere and they want it to run, and ideally at the right performance level. That's all they care about. Anything behind the scenes in terms of how do we make this run is not really their business. Unfortunately, if you look at the landscape today, and the landscape for me is everything you described is part of that cloud landscape. So that could be public cloud, and there is a set of APIs and set of tools. It could be the private infrastructure. It could be a combination of both. Now we have hybrid cloud and multi-cloud emerging as trends, et cetera, et cetera. What's happening right now is, whether he likes it or not, the application developer in any IT department is going to be exposed to that wide variety of infrastructure components, part of the puzzle. And the more components, the more complex it becomes for him, the more painful it is to deploy. So in other words, if, again, going back to this metaphor, this vantage point, which is we're looking at it from the viewpoint of the application developer, we will focus on making deployment easy. No matter whether you're in pure public cloud and you're arbitrating between different public cloud providers, whether you're dealing with a hybrid cloud scenario, it doesn't matter to us. What we look at is how do we make your deployment journey as painless and as easy and as non-expert driven as possible. That's our purpose in life.
So your target audience is application developers.
So, in fact, that's also a very good question. Obviously, from what I said, those who would benefit the most at first would be the application developers. Now, we should not forget that, in any IT department, we do have those infrastructure, those cloud experts, okay? And they suffer too because they ultimately become the bottleneck at the end of any sprint because they are the ones, taking that piece of application with our artifact and deploying it. So ultimately, we serve both communities. That minority of experts in infrastructure or cloud or network security, name it, for them, we are providing a solution that will make it easy for their own internal customers to consume that infrastructure without breaching compliancy, breaching security policies, anything like that. And by the same token, we're making it extremely easy for those application developers, and they are indeed, yes, the audience or the target, for them to go and consume a multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud environment, going forward.
Please also talk about, due to this evolution of role of a developer, how do you look at that, hey, this is where their job technically should end, and since that's not the new norm, you're trying to help them to remove all the complexities that they are responsible for, so they still get enough time to write their business application?
Well, honestly, what you're saying is literally music to my ears, because that's exactly the problem we're trying to solve, and that's basically the conclusion we came to when we looked at the landscape. I mean, we've been in the industry for over 10 years, focusing primarily on infrastructure automation originally. So we were more of a sort of an Ansible or Terraform-like product initially. And we just recently morphed with the release of Cloudclapp here into something that is more business-driven and more catering more to the application community. But to your point, I absolutely agree. I think we need to push as much as possible, or to have application developers focus as much as possible on where they add most value, which is indeed the creative part, which is the part that serves the business they are part of, and remove them or relieve them as much as possible from the hassle of dealing with all of these sub-tools or sub-infrastructure islands. I call them, cloud islands, automation islands, name it. You've got experts, you've got religious zealots in all domains, and then at some point this blows in the face of this application developer guy who's here to develop a piece of application serving probably energy management, and he has nothing to do with that other space that he's dealing with. So that's really what we are after, finding that the right balance. Where should the abstraction demarcation line should sit? Where does it stop? Where should how far should we go in terms of abstracting the dealing with all of that ecosystem enough for it to become easy without taking off some freedom or agility from what's available to those application developers right now?
We have talked about the problem area. We also talk about how do you look at it. Now let's talk about the solution part of it. What are you folks doing to actually help developers and DevOps teams?
Well, a number of things. The first thing that I probably should start with is the concept of environment. For us, we are providing those application developers with a way for them, for each application or piece of application or module that they're building, for them to basically build the corresponding environment on which that application will run, without, again, them being experts on any of the parts that make that environment. So an environment could be some public cloud capacity, a mix of public cloud capacity, could be a set of security mechanisms that are put in place, could be some load balancing, name it. Again, if you look at it from a classical public cloud user, very centralized approach, down to the far edge with the 5G revolution and, the latency sensitive applications and the data that may sit at the edge of the network and Industry 4.0 and all of these trends, you have a wide spectrum in which you can imagine the wide variety of environments that could be built depending on which industry you're sitting in, what's the application you're trying to make operate or run on the environment. So the first key concept here is the environment. And that concept in itself basically incarnates the abstraction philosophy I was referring to a little earlier, because if now you're dealing with environments, which is just a puzzle you're assembling without knowing the taxonomy or the technical language you need for each part, your life is a lot easier. And so that's where it starts. Then we help them set up environments, live with the environments. Those environments are fully automated. And then from an environment concept, we move on to more sophisticated concepts that are more life cycle oriented, where you'd be monitoring security, monitoring compliancy, monitoring cost, arbitrating between cloud options, and so on and so forth.
Excellent. Thanks for explaining that. Now, you folks have also launched a new product or introduced a new product called Cloudclapp. So talk a bit about, in the light of this discussion that we just had, what role is Cloudclapp going to play in simplifying things for developers? And just give us an overview of what it is all about. So
Cloudclapp is really, by the way, Cloudclapp is a product we're releasing, but it's a product that leverages the 10 years experience we've garnered in infrastructure automation in the large sense of that term. So we started even before cloud existed, right? So Cloudclapp builds upon that knowledge and builds upon that technology that we've designed. I should have mentioned that an interesting thing about UBiqube is that we happen to be a European company, and very few Europeans have entered the infrastructure automation market. So that I think it's worth mentioning. So Cloudclapp is built on that knowledge or know-how, and Cloudclapp basically is the most abstracted version that those application developers would be dealing with. So from Cloudclapp, you would be dealing with a graphical interface from which you'll be able to design at will your own set of environments. So imagine you're in an IT department, you have a very large IT department, you have a lot of people dedicated to application design, application support, and so on and so forth, not really infrastructure experts. And then you have this policy whereby a certain number of public cloud providers are now allowed, approved, and they're part of the mix you can leverage. A certain type of private data center is available to you. And you as an application developer using Cloudclapp, you'll be able to create at will those little environments in a very easy way. But all of them approved by whatever governance body that IT department may have and pre-canned into Cloudclapp. So think of it more as a business tool meant for cloud consumption by non-cloud experts. That's really what it's all about.
Once again, who's going to be the either the target audience or the industries or markets that you are targeting with Cloudclapp?
Excellent question. So I mean, obviously, this approach is not something that's going to be appropriate for all. I mean, first of all, I don't think it is appropriate for the community of geeks who really are looking for, getting their hands dirty under the hood. Second, I don't think it's appropriate for any of the SMB or mid-market who are the bread and butter of maybe an Amazon or the bigger public cloud providers. What we are after is basically the top tier, where, and I like this word, where it starts to become a little bizarre in terms of infrastructure. Government cloud, industrial clouds or industrial sectors that have very high compliancy requirements, very high security, requirements. And that may end up with, cloud environments or infrastructure environments that are pretty exotic. There's, a mix and a match of many, many different things. That's our target. For us, for Cloudclapp to be relevant, for the abstraction and the simplification it brings to be relevant, it has to be dealing with complex environments, complex organization, where, life cycle is important, code rot is an issue, expertise dependency is a problem, maybe data sovereignty is a problem. In some sectors you'd like to know that you're using a nationwide cloud provider because you have certain regulations you have to comply with, but not all of your applications need to be there. So maybe another part of your IT asset is basically run on the most cost optimized option out there in the market. Cloudclapp is a perfect fit there. So I would say Fortune 5,000, but obviously not the tech Fortune 5,000 in the sense, not our tech, the Fortune 5,000 that is, the rest of the world that are consuming tech and are suffering from its complexity.
Going back to the point you made about cost, security, compliance, of course, in government sector, those are very, really important, especially you're in Europe, so you folks have even more there. When we look at compliance versus security, I often hear about that. Compliance is something, hey, you know what? You have those check marks, you're done, you're compliant, and you're done. But then we still see a lot of breaches there, a lot of vulnerability. So can you talk about the difference between actual security and compliance, and also how much of it is more or less like cultural, compliance is something which should be at the end, just like in rocket, when the countdown starts, that means you have done all those things. You're compliant, and then you're making check mark versus let's start the check mark and then we'll see. So talk about the difference there, and then how do you actually enable or empower folks so once again they should not get caught in the complexity of security versus compliance. No matter what, when they check that mark, they are actually secure as well.
Again, music to my ears. And you ended up with a point on complexity because yes, compliancy and security, first of all, very, very broad topic. These topics mean different things to different people. And if there's one common denominator, it is complexity. I mean, it's so complicated. So I think the way we help there, and I think we have to be humble, because to be very honest, no one on earth can cover the entire compliancy spectrum or the entire security spectrum. And that's why we have, including the security space, such a number of competitors and a wide variety of options available. But where we come here and where we can help is obviously we try to remove the maximum possible of repetitive tasks involved in checking whether or not you are compliant within your sector, your industry, whatever industry you're operating within. You have a set of compliancies and rules that you have to comply with. We can embed in Cloudclapp checks so that any environment you're building, any deployment of an application that you intend to make remains within the framework of that regulation or that set of rules that you have to comply with. That's one thing. The second thing on the security front, whenever an environment is created by either an application developer or by an expert, name it, whenever it is created, that environment gets scanned. So, we basically scan for any potential security weakness in the environment itself and all the components that make that environment. And then we will make sure that over time we have sort of a security monitoring approach integrated within Cloudclapp, so that your environment that was probably safe day zero may not be in 3 months. And that's sort of keeping track with the changes of that environment or the changes of the potential threats on that environment is also integrated into Cloudclapp. And if it is integrated, that means that we're relieving the folks from that stress of having to deal and keeping themselves abreast of all of those things. So that's the value we bring to the table. In terms of the innovation, and there's a lot still cooking in terms of how we're going to enrich Cloudclapp. But one key theme here I'd like to share with you, there's what I just said, which is making sure you're compliant when you're setting up an environment or when you're deploying your application, making sure that you're deploying it on something that is apparently safe, and making sure that this thing called an environment, whether, it remains safe. Great. But even better is, let's say we can now automate remediation strategies. Say my environment that I set up today, 6 months later, is not relevant anymore or is not safe anymore. And instead of waiting for me to react to this new potential threat the system itself has a plan B and a plan C pre-coded. And that plan B may be the redeployment of the application on a different set of clouds, on a different environment altogether, automatically. These are the kind of things that we are coding inside Cloudclapp, and that will make it very powerful because it's not only about deploying your application day zero and setting up a hybrid cloud environment, which is very complicated in itself, but it's living with it and making it as automated as possible. And that's exactly where we leverage the DNA of where we come from originally. We know how to automate complex infrastructure, and that's what we're coding in Cloudclapp, inserting in Cloudclapp, but in a very abstracted, ideally a 5-year-old kid should be able to use this technology. That's our ultimate dream.
One more thing is that, and we were talking about that earlier, is cost. Folks are becoming very, very cost sensitive, not only just because of economy, because it's very easy to put your credit card on the account of the cloud, but things pile up very quickly. You start things, but you never turn it off. And then the cloud providers, like big ones, they're very good at helping you scale things up, to get things started, but not at shutting them down or close them. So talk about the cost aspect as well for Cloudclapp.
Believe me, Swapnil, we're living it ourselves. We get beaten by our CFO every time and again because exactly what you said. We end up with huge bills and we don't know why exactly this happened. We just forgot about something that was meant to be sandboxed, and the sandbox ends up costing us a fortune. So how Cloudclapp helps here? I mean, 2 components. The first component is basically cost monitoring. And this becomes particularly powerful, again, when you're dealing with a multi-cloud environment or a hybrid cloud scenario. So this ability to monitor cost, at every point in time in the life cycle of your infrastructure or of your environment, if I go back to the term I used initially, that's one thing. But, I'm glad to say that's not enough. I mean, nothing new here. I've been watching a few of your interviews, and I'm sure you've interviewed tons of guys who had cloud, cost monitoring solutions, and I'm certainly great and probably greater than us, because I don't think that's where we make a big difference. The big difference comes from what I was referring to a little earlier, which is our ability to automate. So me knowing that I'm passing a threshold on my spend is one thing, but me being able automatically to reorient that application to another environment that has a different cost point, or based on a live feed of new price data points, to basically automatically decide that now this application or this part of the application, say the database, needs to be hosted somewhere else. Making that happen without having to push any button is really what Cloudclapp is all about. And that's, I think, a fundamental differentiator.
Can you also talk a bit about how folks can access it? Is there a free trial version? What the pricing model looks like? And also, you folks were in beta and you are going GA. So what people who have been playing with beta, what kind of improvements they can expect from it?
Well, all of the things I've been referring to in terms of security management, compliance, cost management, all of these were not available in the beta version. That's the first thing. And I think these are the most visible features in terms of from a value point of view. These are the ones you will see, you will feel them. In terms of how the platform is available, how the solution is available, the solution is a SaaS solution right now, so it's available to all. It's a free version that anyone can leverage and trial. Now, obviously, as we get into those scenarios that I was referring to earlier in our conversation, i.e. the very complex Fortune 5000 type infrastructures scenarios, that's where we'll get to a paid version of Cloudclapp that will have to basically deal with a wider variety of parts in the puzzle to set up these environments, more people dealing with the platform. So that's how the pricing is structured. The complexity drives pricing. Basically, the bigger the impact, the bigger our ability to simplify, the bigger the price.
Nabil, thank you so much for taking time out today and not only talk about the company, the cloud complexity that is actually also defining that how life is becoming difficult for app developers and how you folks are actually helping them out, and also talk about other factors that play in the specific markets. It could be compliance, security, and most important, cost. So thanks for sharing those insights as well. And I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Sabine.